The restaurant sat on a quiet corner of the city, where tall glass windows caught the late afternoon light and turned it soft and golden. Inside, everything looked calm and polished. Tables were spaced wide apart. Plates shone. Voices stayed low, as if the room itself asked people to speak gently. This was a place where money did not need to be loud. It simply existed, steady and sure. The woman arrived just before the dinner rush, as she often did. She liked the early hours, when the room was not yet full and the staff had time to move with care. She wore clean, expensive clothes that did not beg for attention, but still drew it. Her posture showed confidence, the kind built over years of success. People recognized her, even if they did not know her name. Some nodded politely. Others straightened in their seats. The manager greeted her with a careful smile and guided her to her usual table by the window. She sat down and placed her phone beside her plate, screen facing down. She did not rush to look at the menu. She already knew what she wanted. While waiting, her eyes moved around the room, not searching for anything in particular, just observing. It was a habit she had developed long ago in boardrooms and meetings, where watching people often told her more than listening to them. That was when she noticed the waiter. He was younger than most of the staff, slim, with a calm way of walking that did not draw attention. He moved between tables quietly, listening more than speaking. When he placed dishes down, his hands were steady. There was nothing flashy about him, nothing that stood out at first glance. He blended into the background, the way service workers often do in places like this, but something about him caught her eye. During a brief pause, when the dining room was still half empty, he stood near the service station. Instead of checking his phone like some of the others, he pulled a small book from his pocket. The cover was worn, the edges bent. He opened it carefully, as if it mattered to him. She could not see the title from where she sat, but she noticed the small diagrams printed on the pages. Chessboards. He studied them with focus, eyes moving slowly, lips pressed together in thought. The world around him seemed to fade for those few seconds. Then a bell rang softly from the kitchen, and he slipped the book back into his pocket and returned to work. The woman leaned back in her chair, mildly amused. Chess was familiar to her. Very familiar. She had learned it as a child, trained by private teachers who were paid well to sharpen her mind. Later, it became a tool in her adult life, a way to relax, to compete, to remind herself that she liked winning when strategy was involved. She had played in private clubs, charity events, even small tournaments. She rarely lost, and when she did, she remembered it for a long time. Seeing a waiter studying chess in a place like this felt ironic to her. Not wrong, just unexpected. She wondered what he thought he was learning from that little book. She wondered how far he believed those lessons could take him. When he came to her table to take her order, she looked up at him more closely. His voice was polite, calm, without nerves. He asked the usual questions. She gave her order without looking at the menu. As he wrote it down, her eyes drifted again to his pocket, where the book had been. "You like chess?" She asked casually. The question caught him off guard. He paused for a moment, then nodded. "Yes, ma'am." She raised an eyebrow slightly. "How long have you been playing?" He thought before answering. "Since I was a kid. On and off." She smiled, but it was the kind of smile that carried curiosity mixed with doubt. "Self-taught?" "Yes," he said. "Mostly." She let out a small laugh, not unkind, but light. "Interesting." He waited, unsure if she wanted to say more. She didn't. She waved her hand slightly, signaling she was done. He thanked her and moved away. As he walked back toward the kitchen, she watched him go. The idea had already begun to form in her mind. It wasn't cruel, at least not in her eyes. To her, it felt like a harmless bit of fun, something to break the routine of another predictable evening. When her food arrived, she ate slowly, enjoying the meal. Other guests filled the room now. Soft music played. Glasses clinked. Conversations overlapped. Still, her attention kept drifting back to the waiter whenever he passed by. After she finished, she asked for coffee. When he returned with the cup, she looked up at him again. "Do you ever play with real people?" she asked. "Or just books?" He hesitated. "Mostly online. Sometimes with friends." She stirred her coffee, eyes still on him. "I play too," she said. "Quite a bit, actually." That surprised him. "That's nice," he replied, unsure what else to say. She leaned forward slightly. "Would you like to play a game?" He blinked. "Here?" "Why not?" she said, glancing around the room. "After your shift, of course. I'm sure we can find a board." For a moment, he thought she might be joking. The corners of her mouth hinted at amusement. He felt heat rise to his face. People nearby were listening now, even if they pretended not to be. "I'm not very good," he said carefully. "And I still have work to do." She waved away his concern. "It doesn't have to be serious. Just a friendly game. I could use some entertainment." The word hung in the air longer than she intended. Entertainment. He noticed it. So did a few others. A couple at the next table exchanged looks. One of the other waiters glanced over, curious. He stood straight, keeping his voice respectful. "If you'd like," he said. "After my shift." Her smile widened. "Good. I'll be right here." As he walked away, whispers followed. Some guests smiled, already picturing the outcome in their minds. A wealthy woman, confident and skilled, versus a quiet waiter with a pocketbook. It felt like a small show had been announced, and people were waiting for it to begin. The woman took a sip of her coffee, satisfied. To her, it was a light challenge, nothing more. A way to remind herself of her edge, her experience. She did not think of it as unkind. She did not think much about how it might feel to be on the other side of the board. Across the room, the waiter returned to his duties. His face stayed calm, but his thoughts raced. He replayed the invitation in his mind, wondering if he had misunderstood her tone. Part of him wanted to decline later, to avoid attention. Another part, quieter but firm, felt something else rise within him. Focus. He did not see the game as a joke. To him, chess had always been more than that. It was something he had leaned on during long nights and uncertain years. Something that had taught him patience, restraint, and timing. As he cleared plates and refilled glasses, he reminded himself of one thing. On a chessboard, titles did not matter, and the game had not even begun yet. The restaurant's evening atmosphere had changed slightly. The early calm had faded into the gentle hum of conversations, the soft clinking of glasses, and the quiet movements of the staff attending to the growing crowd. The woman remained seated by the window, her coffee now finished, her posture relaxed but alert. She had asked the waiter to play chess, and while at first it had been a playful thought, now she found herself curious. A part of her wanted to see just how well he could play. The idea that someone so quiet and understated could surprise her was oddly appealing. The waiter moved steadily among the tables. He carried plates with care, filled glasses without spilling, and smiled politely at guests who looked up. To anyone else, he was just another part of the background, a quiet, efficient professional. But now, with the woman's challenge in the air, he felt a subtle weight on his shoulders. Not a heavy pressure, exactly, but a keen awareness that this small event, a single game, would be noticed. As the shift slowly wound down, he began to imagine the chessboard. His mind traced the familiar squares, remembered old openings and traps, thought-through sequences he had studied in books and online tutorials. He knew the woman had experience. He could see it in the confident way she carried herself, in the precise way she spoke. She was used to winning, to being ahead. And yet, he felt something steadier rising inside him, a quiet focus that had always served him well in games. When the restaurant finally quieted and the last customers left, he returned to the table by the window. The woman had already moved the chairs closer together and had gestured toward the small chess set she had brought from her bag. She set the pieces carefully, her hands steady and precise. Even in this small act, there was a kind of elegance. The pieces gleamed under the warm lights, the black and white squares lined up perfectly. It was a simple set, but it carried the weight of expectation. She gestured for him to sit. "Shall we begin?" she asked, her voice calm, but carrying a hint of amusement. She leaned back slightly, eyes bright, as if already imagining herself in control of the game. Her smile, though polite, had that familiar undertone, a quiet confidence that said she expected to win. He nodded and pulled his chair closer. "Yes," he said, settling in. He felt the familiar surge of calm focus that came when he faced a chessboard. He knew that for the next hour or so, everything else would fade. There would be no restaurant noise, no staff, no diners. Just the board, the pieces, and the quiet challenge. The first moves were polite, cautious. She opened with one of the classical openings, a series of moves she had used before, designed to test the opponent. He responded carefully, opting for solid positions rather than flashy plays. The game was slow, deliberate, each move considered and measured. She smiled occasionally, commenting on her own strategy, confident that he would falter soon. But he remained calm, returning her moves with equal care. At first, she thought this would be easy. He was polite, respectful, and slow, yes, but so far there was no sign of brilliance. She leaned slightly forward, resting her chin on her hand, watching him. She wondered what he was thinking, how he had learned chess. Was it self-taught, as he had said? Was he just lucky with his moves? Or was there real strategy behind them? She could not tell yet. As the game progressed, she began to notice the subtleties. He anticipated her moves, not in a rushed or clumsy way, but calmly, deliberately. She tried a small trap, one she had used many times before, expecting him to stumble. He did not. Instead, he countered gently but firmly, and slowly began to claim more control over the board. The first hint of surprise appeared in her eyes. The corners of her mouth twitched slightly, almost imperceptibly. Other staff had stayed back after closing, pretending to tidy up or clean tables. A few of them glanced toward the window, curious. The whispers that had begun when she invited him were gone, replaced by a quiet attention. The restaurant felt smaller somehow, as if it had shrunk to only include the two of them and the board. Even the soft hum of the lights seemed to fade into the background. She paused, examining the board, trying to anticipate his next move. She felt a twinge of frustration. It was not just the game. It was the realization that he was not just following along, not just responding. He was thinking ahead. Each piece he moved had purpose. There was logic and patience, and a kind of quiet confidence that mirrored hers, though it came from a different place. She had been trained to win, to dominate, to calculate precisely. And now she was facing someone who had learned the same lessons, not through privilege, but through persistence. He, on the other hand, felt a quiet thrill. Not pride exactly. He had learned to keep that to himself, but a recognition that this moment mattered. This was a chance to measure himself against someone who knew what she was doing, someone who could play, someone who could challenge. And even though the room was emptying and the quiet seemed almost holy, he felt a calm strength settle over him. He would not rush. He would not be intimidated. He had learned that patience and clarity were more powerful than showy moves. She tried another tactic, one that relied on her usual confidence, her subtle skill at psychological play. She made a bold move, shifting her queen aggressively, hoping to unsettle him. He paused, examined the board, then countered in a way that neutralized her attack without overextending himself. His response was quiet but precise. She blinked. Just a quick, sharp blink. No words. She leaned back in her chair, exhaling slightly. The subtle shift in the game had unsettled her more than she expected. As the moves continued, a pattern emerged. She realized that she had underestimated him. Each move he made was deliberate, carefully chosen, and often anticipated what she intended before she even executed. It was a kind of intelligence she had not seen in someone so young, someone so quiet. The recognition settled heavily on her, a mixture of surprise, curiosity, and a strange respect. She tried to adjust, to change tactics, to use her experience and intuition to regain control, but he adapted seamlessly, countering each attempt with calm calculation. The game no longer felt casual. The small joke she had intended, the idea that this would be simple entertainment, faded into the background. It became serious, even in this quiet room. The woman noticed the growing intensity, and with it, a rare feeling of being challenged not just in chess, but in perception. She had assumed, automatically, that he would be outmatched. She had assumed that wealth, training, and experience would make the difference. But assumptions, she realized, were fragile things. The waiter felt the tension too, but in a different way. He felt the satisfaction of doing what he had done countless times before, calculating, planning, thinking 3 moves ahead. He knew the value of silence, of not reacting emotionally. But he also felt the thrill that came from surprising someone who seemed untouchable, someone who carried authority and confidence with every gesture. It was not about proving superiority. It was about respect for both the game and the person across the board. Minutes passed, though it felt like hours. Each move carried weight. Each piece that shifted across the squares seemed to echo in the quiet space. The woman occasionally whispered small remarks under her breath, notes to herself about strategy. He did not respond verbally, only with his moves. It was a rhythm of action and reaction, of thought and counterthought. It was an exchange of minds, and both participants were fully aware of it. The waiter had noticed something else, too. He could see how she reacted not just to his moves, but to the situation itself. She had confidence, yes, but she was learning to adapt in real time, testing her own assumptions, feeling the subtle challenge of someone who refused to be intimidated. And in that observation, he realized the depth of her own skill, not just in chess, but in thought, in patience, in strategy. She was formidable, yes, but human. And humans, he knew, could be outthought. At one point, she made a sudden, bold move, pushing her bishop in a way designed to corner him. He paused longer than usual, thinking carefully. Then he responded in a way that countered her aggression while maintaining his own control. His move was unexpected, even elegant. She leaned back, her fingers lightly brushing her lips as she considered the board. The quiet in the room seemed heavier now, as if both of them were holding their breath. The realization came slowly, creeping in almost imperceptibly. She had thought she could predict him. She had thought she understood the trajectory of the game before it even started. But the more moves passed, the more she understood that he was not merely following her lead. He was thinking independently, creatively, and precisely. And for the first time in a long while, she felt a mixture of surprise and respect. The waiter, too, felt something shift inside him. The game had become more than a casual challenge. He was not intimidated by her wealth or her presence. He was not thinking about who she was. He was focused entirely on the board, on the patterns, on the strategy. And yet, he also recognized that she was good, extremely good, and that each move required his full attention. It was a quiet kind of respect that grew with each passing moment. The restaurant lights cast soft shadows across the chessboard. The pieces seemed larger now, more significant. Each move, each decision, carried weight. The casual challenge that had begun the evening had transformed into a genuine test of skill, focus, and composure. And both of them, in their different ways, were rising to meet it dot by the time the waiter made a particularly clever move. She leaned forward and stared at the board. Her previous amusement was gone. What remained was focus, and a subtle but growing acknowledgement that this game was not going the way she had expected. For the first time, she realized that appearances could be deceiving. Quiet, understated people could possess strength, insight, and skill that was not immediately visible. And sometimes, the most unassuming opponent could teach the most valuable lessons. The game had moved far beyond the casual challenge the woman had intended. What began as a playful test had grown into something far more serious. Each move now carried weight, not just on the chessboard, but in the unspoken dialogue that had formed between them. The quiet energy in the room seemed different. Even the hum of the restaurant lights and the distant sound of the city outside faded into near silence, leaving only the two of them and the board. She had expected to be ahead by now. Her experience in chess, along with her confidence, had suggested she would guide the game, subtly influencing her opponent into predictable responses. But the more she played, the more she realized that he was not predictable. He moved with purpose, not blindly reacting, but carefully calculating, anticipating her strategies in ways that made her pause. She adjusted, trying to regain control, but each time she thought she had a clear path. He subtly shifted the board's balance back in his favor. Her hands hovered over her pieces, lingering longer than usual. She was used to thinking several moves ahead, but there was a tension now she had not felt in a long time. The kind of tension that comes not from the stakes themselves, but from the thrill of a worthy challenge. She studied him closely as he moved. He did not flinch, did not rush. There was a calm certainty in the way he placed his pieces, a focus that seemed almost serene. He looked ordinary, quiet, even reserved, yet every move he made suggested a mind that was alert, patient, and precise. She tried to unsettle him verbally, making small, casual remarks about certain positions, smiling as if to suggest she was confident in her next sequence. "You're holding back," she said softly, leaning slightly forward. "Surely you must have a better plan than that." He looked at her, calm and steady, but his eyes held nothing but focus on the board. "I'm just waiting," he said. "The right time will come." That answer, simple as it was, made her pause. It wasn't disrespectful. It wasn't dismissive. It was just true. She realized, with a small flicker of surprise, that he had a rhythm, a patience she had not accounted for. He was not moving carelessly, nor was he intimidated. Every piece he had advanced, every position he had claimed, was part of a plan she could not yet see. She leaned back in her chair, studying the board. She had been in control, she thought, but now the balance had shifted. The quiet waiter with his simple demeanor and humble presence had begun to claim subtle dominance. It was not flashy. It was not dramatic. But it was undeniable that time seemed to stretch. The game no longer had the feel of casual amusement. It had become a conversation between minds. She made a move she had relied on many times in the past, a bold, aggressive strike designed to corner his king quickly. In any other match, it would have worked. But he responded without hesitation, shifting his pieces in a quiet but precise counter that neutralized her threat. Her eyes widened slightly. For a moment, she considered whether she had misjudged him. Her fingers tapped lightly against the table. She had expected to play a quick, entertaining game, perhaps to show him the difference between experience and practice. Instead, she felt herself challenged in a way she had not felt in years. He paused after her last move, studying the board carefully. He did not speak, but she could feel his thoughtfulness in the air, almost like a silent wave passing between them. Then he moved a piece with slow precision. It was not an aggressive strike, but a quiet claim of advantage, the kind that revealed careful planning rather than impulse. She noticed the shift immediately. The board was no longer balanced the way she had assumed it would be. His control was subtle, invisible to anyone who did not know how to look, but it was real. She leaned forward, her eyes narrowing slightly, tracing every potential sequence. She realized that he was not just reacting to her moves, he was anticipating them, thinking 3, 4, even 5 moves ahead. A small knot of tension formed in her stomach. It was unfamiliar. She was used to being in charge, to holding the advantage early, to controlling the pace. And yet, in this quiet restaurant corner, with no audience except a few lingering staff, she felt that advantage slipping. Slowly, deliberately, she adjusted her strategy, trying to regain ground. But every move she tried was met with calm, precise responses that forced her to reconsider. The waiter's expression remained calm. There was no arrogance, no showiness, no attempt to flaunt skill. Every piece he moved felt deliberate but natural, almost as if he were in conversation with the board itself. She realized that this was what made him different. Not his background, not his youth, not the fact that he was a waiter in a restaurant. It was the patience, the focus, the ability to remain entirely present in the moment, thinking several moves ahead without hesitation. Minutes passed. The room seemed to shrink. Outside noises faded further, replaced by the quiet click of chess pieces against the board. She felt herself becoming absorbed, not with pride or ego, but with genuine fascination. She had expected to be in control, to dominate, and instead, she found herself learning. Every move he made carried a lesson in patience and calculation. Every sequence revealed a thought process she had underestimated. She tried to challenge him in a different way, using psychological tactics she had relied on in business and games for years. She spoke casually, commenting on positions, pretending she was confident, smiling lightly to suggest ease. But it had less effect than she expected. He did not flinch, did not react emotionally. He did not care about her tone or demeanor. He cared only about the board, about the sequence of moves, about strategy. And that was the moment she realized something else. She had underestimated him, not just because of his position as a waiter or because he was younger. She had underestimated him because she had assumed that life experience and appearances always translated to ability. She had assumed that someone quiet and humble could not be formidable. And yet, here he was, calmly defying those assumptions. Her mind raced as she considered her next moves. She was used to controlling games, to anticipating reactions, to leveraging small advantages into decisive victories. But with him, each attempt to control the board was met with calm counterbalance. He did not panic, he did not make reckless mistakes, and he did not react emotionally. He was precise. He was patient. He was, in every sense, competent in a way she had not expected. The subtle shift in power on the board began to reflect in the room around them. A few of the remaining staff paused their cleaning to glance over. They could sense the tension, the quiet intensity, the unspoken challenge that had grown from something meant to be playful into a genuine test of skill. The atmosphere was charged, though no one said a word. Everyone seemed to understand that this game was no longer about entertainment. It was about the skill of two minds meeting, quietly but fully, on equal footing. She realized she had to adapt. She had to set aside pride and assumptions, to focus fully on the game rather than the performance. She leaned forward, her fingers hovering over a knight, considering every possible sequence, every trap, every potential counter. She thought about how to regain balance, how to maneuver, how to force an opening without falling into his calm defenses. Meanwhile, he continued his steady rhythm. Each move he made was thoughtful, deliberate, and precise. He did not rush. He did not overthink. He simply responded to the opportunities presented, always aware of potential threats, always planning a few moves ahead. His confidence was quiet, unassuming, almost invisible, but it was undeniable in its effect. At one point, she tried a more aggressive tactic, pushing her queen to a threatening position. She expected him to falter, to react quickly under pressure, to make a minor mistake that would allow her to regain control. But he did not falter. He paused, studied the board carefully, and then moved a single piece that nullified her threat entirely. She sat back, exhaling softly. The admiration was there, mingled with frustration and surprise. She had underestimated him at the start. She had assumed this would be easy. And now, quietly, without dramatic flair or arrogance, he had begun to outmaneuver her. The realization settled in slowly. This was no longer about her amusement or proving dominance. This was a genuine challenge, a test of skill and focus. And the more she played, the more she found herself learning not just about chess, but about patience, humility, and the danger of assumptions. He, for his part, felt calm but aware. He knew the game had shifted. He knew she had experience, and that her strategies were sharp. But he also knew that the board did not care about titles, money, or confidence. It cared only about strategy, foresight, and patience. And he had both in equal measure. Minutes stretched further, the intensity of each move heightening. The quiet rhythm of placement, calculation, and anticipation continued. Neither spoke much. Neither moved hastily. The room felt suspended in a delicate balance, as though the outside world had disappeared completely. By the time he advanced his bishop in a subtle but clever maneuver. She leaned forward, studying the board with furrowed brows. Her confidence had not disappeared entirely, but it was tempered by a newfound awareness. She had underestimated him, and now she realized that the game was far from what she had imagined. It had become a genuine test of skill, intellect, and composure. In that quiet moment, both of them understood the truth of the game. Chess did not care about wealth, status, or expectation. It cared only about the mind across the board and the choices it made. And in this unassuming restaurant corner, a quiet waiter and a confident woman had begun to teach each other lessons neither had expected. Silently and profoundly, the restaurant had grown quiet, with only the soft hum of the lights and the distant sounds of the city outside. The few remaining staff moved silently, pretending to tidy up tables, but stealing glances at the chessboard. What had started as a playful challenge now had the intensity of a true contest. The pieces were spread across the board, black and white interlocking in a complex pattern that reflected hours of careful thought and strategy. The woman leaned forward, her chin resting lightly on her hand. She had been confident at the start, sure that her years of experience would carry her easily to victory. But as each move passed, she realized that this quiet waiter was not just competent. He was clever, patient, and unfazed by her attempts to unsettle him. Every sequence he created was deliberate, precise, and elegant, a testament to focus and thought rather than flashy tactics. She studied the board with growing admiration and an undercurrent of tension. She had tried to trap him, to force him into mistakes, but he countered with calm precision. He was like a mirror to her strategies, anticipating her moves without seeming to react, always one step ahead. And now, for the first time, she felt a creeping uncertainty. The game had reached a critical point. Her king was slightly exposed, a minor weakness that could become significant if not handled correctly. She could feel the pressure building, a tension that made her heart beat a little faster. She had expected to control the pace, but now she found herself forced to respond carefully, considering every possibility, every potential counter. He moved his knight with quiet confidence, placing it in a position that seemed harmless at first glance. But she saw the logic behind it almost immediately. It was subtle, almost invisible to someone who did not know the game deeply, but it carried a threat. A small shift in position, and it could grow into a serious danger for her king. She paused, her fingers hovering over her queen, thinking through all possible responses. The air in the room seemed to thicken. The few staff watching began to hold their breath, sensing that something significant was about to happen. The woman, Elle, leaned closer to the board, tracing paths in her mind, trying to find a way to regain control. But with every potential move, he seemed to anticipate, countering effortlessly, keeping the balance of the game subtly in his favor. She decided to change tactics, trying a bold strategy that required risk. She moved her rook aggressively, aiming to corner one of his key pieces and gain an advantage. Her heart raced slightly. This was a gamble, but it was one she felt she had to take. For the first time in the game, she allowed herself a small thrill of excitement, the kind she usually felt when a risky move paid off. He paused. His eyes lingered on the board, analyzing the position carefully. He did not rush. He did not react emotionally. Then, slowly, deliberately, he moved his bishop in a way that neutralized her attack entirely. It was simple, quiet, and brilliant. The room felt lighter for a moment, though only because the tension had shifted. She blinked, realizing that her bold move had been anticipated and countered without fanfare. She sat back, her fingers lightly brushing the edge of the table. She felt a mixture of surprise, admiration, and frustration. She had underestimated him, and now it was clear that he had skill she had not expected. He had not reacted to her tactics with panic or fear. He had simply countered with calm precision and quiet intelligence. For the first time, the atmosphere changed. She could feel the eyes of the few remaining staff, of the quiet observer who had been hovering near the kitchen, even of the shadows in the room. Everyone seemed to sense that the game had reached a turning point. What had been a casual challenge had become a genuine contest, a battle of minds where each move carried real consequence. She tried another strategy, moving her queen forward to create pressure on his defenses. Her movements were deliberate, careful, designed to force him into a mistake. She expected hesitation, a minor error that she could exploit to reclaim control. But he did not hesitate. He studied the board, considered all possibilities, and then made a single move that shifted the balance completely. It was quiet, almost unnoticeable to someone who did not understand chess. But to her, it was devastating. A subtle placement of a pawn, seemingly insignificant, created a chain reaction she had not anticipated. Suddenly, her king was in a vulnerable position, exposed to a series of moves that could lead to checkmate if she did not respond perfectly. Her heart skipped a beat. She leaned closer to the board, tracing all possible sequences in her mind. Each potential move she considered was blocked, neutralized, or countered in advance. She realized, slowly and with a mix of disbelief and admiration, that he had outhought her. The quiet, reserved waiter, who had seemed unassuming at the start, had maneuvered her into a position she had not expected. For a long moment, they both sat silently, eyes fixed on the board. There was no need for words. The tension, the anticipation, the quiet brilliance of the play itself spoke more than any conversation could. She felt a rare sense of humility. She had underestimated him, and in that realization, she found a strange respect and curiosity she had not expected to feel. He moved next with calm precision, advancing his rook into a position that threatened multiple pieces at once. It was subtle, Again, almost invisible if one did not watch closely. But it created a real problem for her. Her mind raced, trying to anticipate the consequences, weighing options, considering sequences. Every move she imagined seemed to meet a counter. Every strategy she tried seemed anticipated. The room felt charged. The quiet staff, the few remaining diners, the shadows all seemed to lean in, waiting to see what would happen next. The woman's fingers hovered over her queen. She had one last chance, one bold move that could potentially shift the game back in her favor, but it was risky. If she made a mistake, it could leave her completely exposed. She took a deep breath, trying to steady herself. Chess had always been a game of patience, calculation, and foresight. She had relied on these skills countless times, but now she realized that skill alone was not enough. She had to read the mind across the board, anticipate intentions, and recognize subtle patterns she had not noticed before. She moved her queen with precision, carefully positioning it to threaten his pieces and create an opening. She leaned back slightly, heart racing. This was a bold move, and she knew it. The waiter did not respond immediately. He studied the board with calm focus, his eyes tracing every possibility, every sequence. He did not speak, did not flinch. He simply considered. Then, slowly, deliberately, he moved his knight. The placement was quiet, understated, almost casual, but its effect was immediate. Her king was now in danger, threatened by a chain of moves that she could not block completely. Her eyes widened. She traced the sequence in her mind, counting moves carefully. It was brilliant, simple, and unexpected. She felt a mix of shock and admiration. The room seemed to shrink around them. The game had transformed completely. What had begun as a casual challenge had reached a moment of brilliance, a quiet but stunning demonstration of skill and foresight. The quiet waiter had seen an opportunity, anticipated her strategy, and executed a move that changed everything. She paused, breathing lightly, trying to process the situation. She had expected to guide the game, to control it, to enjoy a light challenge. Instead, she found herself humbled, confronted with skill and intelligence she had not anticipated. The admiration she felt was mixed with tension and surprise. She had been outmaneuvered, quietly but completely. He did not celebrate. There was no smile, no gesture of triumph. He simply moved his hand back, eyes still on the board, calm and steady. The beauty of the move was in its subtlety, in its quiet effectiveness. It was a demonstration of skill, patience, and careful observation, not arrogance or showiness. The woman studied the board, tracing every potential response. She realized that she could not counter this move fully. Every sequence she imagined led to her king being exposed or vulnerable. She had underestimated him from the start. She had assumed that experience, confidence, and a sense of control would carry her through. And now she understood that assumptions could be dangerous. The few staff members who remained watched in silence, sensing the gravity of the moment. The quiet had returned to the room, a tension that made even small movements feel significant. The chessboard, with its black and white squares and carefully arranged pieces, had become a battlefield of intellect, foresight, and patience. And in this quiet corner, two minds had met, each testing the other, each pushing boundaries, each revealing unexpected skill. She finally leaned back, exhaling softly. Her hands rested on the edge of the table. The admiration she felt for him was profound. He had played with calm precision, anticipation, and intelligence. He had taken her bold moves, her confidence, and her experience, and transformed them into an opportunity to demonstrate his own skill. For a long moment, neither spoke. The quiet, subtle intensity of the game hung in the air. Then she looked at him and said softly, almost reluctantly, That was unexpected. He met her gaze calmly, eyes steady, still focused on the board. "The board does not lie," he said quietly. "It only shows what is possible." She smiled faintly, a mixture of humility and respect. The game was far from over, but the balance had shifted. She had expected to dominate, to amuse herself, to test him lightly. Instead, she had found herself challenged, outmaneuvered, and quietly humbled in that moment. Both of them understood something profound. Chess was more than a game. It was a test of patience, foresight, humility, and respect. And in this quiet corner of the restaurant, a bold woman and a quiet waiter had discovered that brilliance could come from unexpected places. That skill did not rely on appearance or background, and that even the smallest, quietest moves could have the power to stun. The board sat between them, the pieces frozen for a moment in perfect tension. And in that silence, the room seemed to acknowledge the quiet beauty of strategy, intelligence, and human focus. The restaurant felt unusually still. The soft glow of the lights reflected off the polished surfaces, the quiet hum of the city outside barely audible. The chessboard sat between them, pieces arranged in a tense and intricate pattern. The air seemed charged, heavy with thought, anticipation, and something almost electric. Both players had reached a point where every move mattered, where one small shift could decide the outcome. The woman studied the board carefully. Her previous confidence had softened into a mix of concentration and respect. She had come expecting an easy challenge, maybe a little fun at the expense of someone quiet, and now she found herself fully engaged, genuinely tested. She traced the lines with her eyes, imagining sequences and counters, noting weaknesses in her own positions. Every move he made had forced her to think harder, to plan more deliberately, and to reconsider assumptions she had taken for granted. The waiter, meanwhile, remained calm, almost serene. He moved his pieces with quiet confidence, each placement considered and precise. He had no need to hurry, no need to boast. He had shown patience and foresight, allowing the game to unfold in its own rhythm. And now, as they reached the final stage, he felt the subtle excitement that came from a challenge well met. Not pride, exactly, but satisfaction, a deep, quiet pleasure in the meeting of minds. She made a careful move, nudging her rook into a position meant to create pressure on his pieces. Her eyes scanned the board, trying to predict his response, considering possibilities and contingencies. She had learned something important. He did not play like others she had faced. He did not rely on boldness or intimidation. He relied on calculation, patience, and observation. Each piece he moved had purpose, and each placement seemed to anticipate her next move. He paused before responding. The calm in his posture and expression did not change, but his mind raced through options. Every possible response, every threat, every subtle opening, he weighed them carefully. Then, in a simple, deliberate motion, he moved his knight. The placement was unassuming, almost casual, but the effect was immediate. It threatened multiple pieces at once, creating a chain reaction of possibilities that left her with only a few viable options. She leaned back slightly, exhaling softly, the quiet thrill of challenge mixed with a deep respect. She had underestimated him from the beginning, assuming that his role as a waiter meant he would be casual or inexperienced. She realized now that skill, intelligence, and focus had little to do with appearance or occupation. Here, in this small restaurant corner, she had been challenged, surprised, and ultimately humbled by someone she had overlooked. Her fingers hovered over her queen, tracing potential moves. She considered countering, trying to regain control, but every option seemed fraught with risk. The chain of possibilities he had created was elegant, precise, and almost impossible to counter without leaving herself vulnerable elsewhere. She realized that this game was no longer about casual amusement or playful mockery. It was about skill, patience, and strategy. A few of the remaining staff had stopped their work, standing quietly at a distance. Even they seemed aware that the moment had shifted. What had started as a simple challenge had evolved into something more, a demonstration of quiet brilliance, focus, and mental acuity. The room seemed smaller, as if the space itself had contracted to encompass only the two players and the chessboard. She took a deep breath and made her next move, carefully advancing her bishop. She tried to anticipate the consequences, but she could feel the subtle pressure of the positions he had created. Every move she made was met with calm counterplay. Every plan she tried to enact seemed anticipated. And yet, there was no arrogance in his actions. Only precision, patience, and quiet intelligence. He responded with a single, quiet move of his queen, shifting it into a position that seemed harmless, but immediately strengthened his control over the board. She leaned closer, eyes scanning, fingers poised. The subtlety of the placement struck her. It was the kind of move that could go unnoticed by a casual observer, but it carried a silent power that made her realize just how deeply he understood the game. Time seemed to slow. Each second stretched as they both considered the board, imagining sequences, anticipating outcomes. The restaurant, once filled with casual chatter and background noise, was now a stage for this quiet but intense duel. The chessboard was more than just a game. It had become a meeting of minds, a silent dialogue, a contest of patience, intelligence, and insight. She tried another strategy, moving her knight aggressively. Her goal was simple: create a threat, regain control, and force him to respond under pressure. She had expected hesitation, perhaps even a mistake. But once again, he remained calm. He studied the board, calculated the possible outcomes, and responded with a subtle yet decisive move that neutralized her threat entirely. Her eyes widened slightly. She had underestimated him again. She realized now that every move he made was deliberate, thoughtful, and anticipatory. He had the ability to see several steps ahead, to recognize patterns, to predict intentions without reacting emotionally. This was not luck or casual skill. It was the result of focus, patience, and intelligence honed over time. The room seemed to hold its breath. The staff, the few remaining diners, even the city sounds beyond the windows faded into insignificance. Everything had contracted to the chessboard, the two players, and the tension that now filled the space. The game had reached a climax, a quiet but unmistakable turning point. She traced the possible moves with her eyes, considering the risks. She could attempt a bold play, one that might shift the balance in her favor, but it was risky. One mistake could cost her the game entirely. Her heart beat faster, not with fear, but with the thrill of challenge. This was a test not just of skill, but of composure, strategy, and insight. He made his next move with deliberate calm. It was subtle, almost invisible to someone not paying close attention, yet its effect was immediate. Her king was now vulnerable in a way she had not anticipated. She scanned the board, tracing every sequence, every potential threat. Each move she imagined seemed blocked or countered in advance. The quiet brilliance of his strategy had placed her in a position she could not easily escape. She paused, breathing lightly, her fingers hovering over her queen. She realized that the moment had arrived, the point where one move could decide everything. The anticipation was palpable. She had been surprised, humbled, and challenged beyond her expectations. And now she faced the quiet reality that the next sequence could bring the game to its climax. She made her move carefully, advancing her rook to create a threat. Her eyes scanned the board, imagining consequences, anticipating counters. She had learned much from the game already: patience, humility, observation, and respect for the mind across the board. Yet she still hoped, faintly, that she could reclaim balance, regain control, and find an opening. He studied the board, calm and steady. His eyes moved from piece to piece, tracing sequences, calculating possibilities. Then, slowly, deliberately, he made the move that would define the game. His knight advanced to a square that seemed simple, unassuming, yet in an instant created an unavoidable chain of consequences. Her king was now exposed to a sequence of threats she could not fully counter. Her eyes widened, and for a moment, silence filled the room. The realization hit her. He had anticipated, calculated, and executed a move that was both simple and brilliant. The subtlety of it was perfect. It was the kind of move that could stun anyone, the culmination of patience, observation, and quiet intelligence. She leaned back in her chair, exhaling softly. Her hands rested lightly on the table. She had been outmaneuvered, not by arrogance or force, but by calm focus and careful calculation. She felt admiration and humility in equal measure. The quiet waiter had taken what had begun as a playful challenge and transformed it into a masterful display of skill. The remaining staff, who had been watching quietly, whispered among themselves, though softly enough not to break the tension. They had witnessed something extraordinary, a simple game of chess that had revealed unexpected talent, patience, and intelligence. The room, still heavy with quiet tension, seemed to acknowledge the brilliance of the play. She finally looked at him and smiled faintly. "I didn't see that coming," she said softly, a mixture of respect and amusement in her tone. He looked at her calmly, meeting her gaze. "Sometimes the simplest move has the greatest effect," he replied quietly. She nodded, a small laugh escaping her. It was a laugh of admiration, surprise, and acceptance. She had begun the evening expecting a playful diversion, perhaps a light show of skill, but instead she had learned something unexpected. She had been challenged, surprised, and quietly humbled. And in that experience she found a rare sense of respect and connection. For a long moment neither moved. The board sat between them, pieces in their final positions, reflecting the culmination of strategy, patience, and focus. The quiet intensity of the game had passed, replaced by a sense of calm accomplishment. She realized that this experience, this simple game, had given her something far greater than victory. It had reminded her of the power of humility, patience, and observation. He, too, felt the satisfaction of the game, not in winning, but in the quiet recognition of effort, intelligence, and focus. He had anticipated, calculated, and executed with calm precision, and in doing so, had revealed the depth of skill that often went unnoticed in everyday life. The restaurant lights glowed softly, reflecting off the chessboard. The quiet had returned, but the energy lingered, a sense of having witnessed something extraordinary in an ordinary place. The woman and the waiter sat in mutual respect, understanding that the game had been more than just a challenge. It had been a lesson in patience, intelligence, and quiet brilliance. As they finally stood, stretching after hours of intense focus, she extended a hand. "Thank you for the game," she said sincerely. He shook her hand with quiet composure. "Thank you," he replied. "It was a good challenge." They smiled at each other, a subtle acknowledgment of what had just transpired. It was a moment of connection forged through intellect, patience, and respect. And in that small, ordinary restaurant, a quiet game of chess had revealed something extraordinary about skill, humility, and the unexpected brilliance of the human mind. The evening had begun with a playful challenge, but it ended with a silent recognition of talent, intelligence, and mutual respect. The board, the pieces, and the quiet moves had told a story that words could not fully capture, a story of patience, strategy, and the power of observing carefully before acting. And for both of them, it was a memory that would linger far longer than the simple game itself.